Heap Lou had the makings of a great success story. Immigrated from Vietnam and making his way through an Illinois college when things suddenly changed. He left home at 6:30 in the morning en route to a new job that he was really excited about, but suddenly something happened and he disappeared, and for the last 20 years his family's been left scratching their head wondering what happened. Hey folks, welcome to Profiling Evil in this missing person episode. I hope that you'll take time to hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell so you're getting all of our notifications on videos like this one and all the stuff that's coming out in the future. Hey, please make sure you're sharing Profiling Evil with all your friends. And again, hit the like and subscribe button. Now, this video was created more than a year ago while we were working with Adventures with Purpose. And folks, we did the investigative groundwork on a bunch of cases for the team back then. That was all before their troubles started. We helped them find four people that have been missing, one for almost 20 years. We're really proud of that work, and we're proud of the chance we had to work alongside of their team and their efforts in trying to find people. Now, for the sake of both sides of that horrible situation, the situation they find themselves in today, we pulled back a little bit while we watched and waited. I really hope justice is served and that long-seated injuries can begin to heal for both of the parties involved in this thing. There needs to be justice. Now, that said, we sat on these cases for more than a year and waited for things to settle down. But a few months ago, I was contacted by some of the families of the cases that we looked into, and they asked if we'd share their stories. Now, I do this knowing that some of you might criticize us for stepping up and sharing these stories because we were associated back then. But I hope you'll consider the family members and their feelings and their desire to have their loved one's story told. I hope, in essence, that you'll agree with me that their stories still deserve being shared. So, we're going to dig into this, and I'm being joined by my friend Taylor Nichols of TGI Crime Day. Again, keep in mind, this was recorded nearly a year and 4 months ago, so some of the audio and the video isn't that great, but it's usable, and again, I think the story's worth telling. So, with that, let's jump into this case, Taylor.
Waking up a few minutes later than normal set Heap Lou's disappearance into motion. It was only a matter of minutes, yet that fateful early morning in December of 2003 changed. So today we are talking about Heap Lou. Heap and his family moved to Illinois from Vietnam in 1996, and the Lou family lived in Chicago for a while and then moved about 10 miles to Berwyn in 2002. Heap was 21 years old and attended classes at Truman College. After leaving school, he briefly worked at a local pizza restaurant, which sounds like a great job to me. I love a pizza place. And then he landed a great job working for an electronics manufacturer called Storm Products in Woodridge. He had been working for Storm Products for about 2 weeks when he suddenly missed a shift on December 15th, 2003. That morning, Heap left his house a little bit later than usual, around 6:30 a.m. It would usually take Heap about 35 minutes to get to work, but he never made it in for his shift. Since that morning, Heap and his car have both been missing. He didn't have a cell phone or a credit card, so there was really no way to track his movements. Mike, what else do we know about Heap and his family relationship?
You know, this case is really puzzling to me. There is a substantial amount of crime in that area, Illinois. Much of it influenced from Chicago, where if you watch any of the papers or reports, crime has reached an all-time high recently. But there's nothing that suggests or supports that Heap was involved in anything illegal. I couldn't find anything that suggested there was a drug habit or a propensity to hang out in high risk areas. In fact, I found one report where his brother in law, Howie Vong, told a local reporter that Heap, quote, usually comes home from work and plays on his computer. How many kids does that sound like? He continued, "This is the first time he left home without calling or anything," close quote. Now, I found that comment kind of interesting, and it leaves me scratching my head in two regards. First, was it normal for Lou to report to somebody whenever he left his home? I mean, this is a 21-year-old kid, and I get that it's a culture that I don't fully understand. But does that even include when he leaves for work at 5:30 in the morning? It kind of leaves me wondering if the statement was a little misleading, and that perhaps more likely it's more reasonable to say this young man didn't simply go places for any amount of unscheduled time without letting his family know where he is and what he's doing. I I thought back on my own experiences. I've traveled in Vietnam a number of times for work and for pleasure. This young man fits more into your phase of life than mine, Taylor. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, but I rarely in Vietnam or here, Vietnam, even in outlying villages, did I run across kids about that age that didn't have a cell phone with them. Often it was even in places where there wasn't even a cellular signal, but they still had a mobile device. And these mobile devices have become a part of our wardrobe. They contain our cameras, our photographs, our contact information. And of course, whenever we're near Wi-Fi or we do have broadband connectivity, they become a lifeline. And so I guess I'm going to pose this to you. Thinking back on your own life and recalling that this was 2003, almost 19 years ago, how reasonable in your mind was it then and today for somebody who spends a great deal of time on a computer to be without a mobile device when they're out and about?
I'm trying to remember. So 2003 was the year that we moved into the house that my parents still live in now. So I vaguely remember that time, and I remember my parents both had cell phones for sure. Um, but it wasn't. I know that they didn't really text on them until much later than that. So maybe if you were 21, if you didn't have kids at home, like my parents had cell phones so that they could get in contact with me when I would be home by myself and things like that. But I feel like that was still a time when maybe you could get away without having a cell phone. You didn't necessarily need one at that point. I feel like now it's like you said, it's part of our wardrobe. It's attached to our hands at all times. And most people don't even have home phones. So I feel like right now you would kind of need one. It's how you navigate to and from places you've never been before. You can keep track of all of your texts, your phone calls, your emails. So I think that it's so different to look at these cases from almost 20 years ago and think about how different that dynamic was with a cell phone versus without a cell phone. It seems like it would maybe be a normal thing for him to not have one at that age if he was living at home and he was going to classes that were he at one point was going to classes at the local college, so he wasn't doing a lot of traveling. So really the only people he was getting in touch with was his family. And I think as far as the dynamic of if he was telling them every time he left the house, I doubt that it was necessarily that relationship. But I know when I was 21, still living at home, I definitely did check in with my mom at least. So if I knew that after work I wasn't planning on being home, especially where he worked a shift that they were used to him working from 7 till about 3 o'clock, he would be home around probably 4. So I think that if he wasn't planning on coming home that night, he would probably just give them a heads up so they wouldn't worry.
So let me ask you this though. If you were working a job that required you to leave between 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning, would you have gone into your parents' room and said, "I'm leaving now"?
No, definitely not. But when I was about that age, my parents and I kind of all left for work around the same time. So it was kind of like you all would be walking out the door at the same time, kind of knowing where you're headed. So I don't think that he would have necessarily told them, "Hey, I'm going to work now," but maybe they all had a similar routine in the mornings that they were used to him following, or they knew his work schedule. So I don't know. It's one of those things that's so hard because for some families, they're like, my parents never made me check in, or my parents never, worried about that kind of a thing. But I know for my family, like if I was normally home around 4 p.m. and I didn't reach out and say, "Hey, I'm not coming home until later," I know for sure. It's also because I'm an only child. So my parents were like, "Where is she?" I think that also kind of plays into that a little bit, maybe.
That's a really important point, though, and something that we all need to remind ourselves all the time when we look at these kinds of cases is that while something might be normal for us, it may not be the dynamic in a different family or for a different person. The way they react may be entirely different than our own. So to project our own value system on somebody else is usually counterproductive.
Definitely. What do we know about the family dynamic with Heap and his family?
Well, it's really important that we kind of look more at this dynamic. Even after that discussion that we've had, I kept remembering everything that I've preached for years in front of police officer training classes. This idea that we have to study who the victim is, and that can become one of the most important parts of the missing person investigation. Now, uh, Heap's family declined to speak with us as part of our research, but we did learn some of the things that you've mentioned, that they were immigrants to the United States from Vietnam. Now, it started initially with Heap's father. His name's Tai Luu. He ran this little wholesale business in Vietnam, and prior to that, served in the military, something that every Vietnamese young man does between the ages of 18 and 27. So the fact that he served in the military wasn't an anomaly. It was required. This kid, Heap, had sisters, one that was older than him and one that was younger. And all of them immigrated from Vietnam into the United States after their dad had been here for a number of years. I think almost as many as 9 or 10 years. And so he had established himself and established an income here, probably was sending some money home during those years, but he finally got his family over here. I mentioned earlier that there were a couple of things that bothered me. That the second thing, perhaps the more likely question I have, is whether law enforcement forensically interrogated Heap's computer. If they looked at his social networks and personal data that might show a little bit more about what he was thinking or who he was communicating with back then. And again, it's 2003, almost 20 years ago. It's hard for us to imagine, like you were saying earlier, that even 20 years ago, there was the kind of social media and other experiences like we have today. But back 20 years ago, we were being bombarded by technology, uh, much like today. I mean, it was coming fast and furious. It was existing, although it was in infancy. I mean, think about, here's a name people don't hear very often anymore. AOL was the big email provider.
Mike, can I tell you, I have an AOL email address
You still have your
that I
AOL
still,
account?
yeah, I kind of use it as, when you go to stores and they say, "Oh, what's your email for their point systems or whatever?" That's the one that I use. And every time the 16-year-old working behind the counter is like, "AOL?" I'm like, "I know. Okay, I know. I can't get rid of it now. There's too many things attached to it."
That's a great strategy, though. Then all your junk mail goes
Yes,
to one file. That's a great
exactly.
strategy. Well, and there were also some big names like we're used to seeing today. I mean, did you realize that LinkedIn was starting in that 2003 era? And there were other little social media platforms, one called Friendster. I remember when that came out, and MySpace was probably one of the first that you probably jumped into when you were first experiencing it. So there are areas where law enforcement could go back and with investigative warrants get information and maybe learn more. I can only assume that they've done that, but that would give us a great idea of who he's talking with, who he's socializing with, really paint a picture of what his life's all about. But bottom line is, this kid went from work into his house, and like a lot of kids we see nowadays, his relationships and his experiences were all happening online, even 20 years ago.
That definitely would be an interesting thing to look into, especially if he was doing any of the online gaming. I know that I'm not sure as far as how early that started, but there are a lot of people who have whole communities of friends specifically through these online games. So it would be really interesting to be able to know if he was talking to people through that avenue, and maybe it wasn't something where he was necessarily going out and meeting up with friends every day, like his family said he was a little bit more closed off and would come home and play on his computer. Maybe that was more of his social aspect and was a more comfortable social interaction for him rather than meeting up with people in person. So after Heap went missing, his family searched and called anyone and everyone they could think of who might know where he went. His parents were heartbroken when their searches didn't turn up any solid information. Law enforcement also searched for Heap. They actually searched roads that were along his route to work and in Woodridge near where Storm Products was located. They even did a search where the Lou's previously lived in Chicago to see if anything turned up there, but unfortunately, nothing did. Law enforcement didn't see any clear signs that Heap was a victim of foul play, but there was also no signs that he possibly ran away from home.
Well, hey, folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I wanted to take a minute and tell you about our affiliate, Truthfinder. It's a company that I've been using for a couple of years to research cases and individuals. Now, Truthfinder uses publicly available information, but it brings it together in a way that provides answers quickly and concisely. You can use Truthfinder to check out your new babysitter, or maybe that new love in your life, or just to find somebody you haven't seen for an awfully long time. Truthfinder provides these comprehensive background reports, telephone reports, email reports, and even location information. So when you go in and examine the information in their search results, you're going to find personal information, contact information, and places where your target has lived, not only historically, but currently. Now, all this can seem really overwhelming and maybe a little invasive to you. So I want to make sure you understand all of the information is publicly available information. Truthfinder just has an algorithm that brings it all together in a way that makes it a whole lot easier to access. Now, Truthfinder is an affiliate, which means we get a tiny commission when you sign up. It's about enough to buy a Diet Dr. Pepper, frankly. But I want you to know that I use it every single day, and I hope that you'll take a moment and sign up with them. I've given you a discount code, and it's down in the link below, so make sure you grab it. EVIL10. And remember, you can cancel this thing at any time. Now, I hope you'll give them a try, but before you do, let's just jump back into today's discussion.
So, Mike, as I was thinking about some of the possibilities of maybe an accident happening, I actually looked into the weather conditions for December 15th, 2003. I thought maybe since it was December, there could have been bad weather that would lead to bad road conditions that could possibly cause an accident. But it looks like, aside from a little wind, the sky was very clear, visibility was good, and sunrise that day was at 7:12. So it was still dark when he left home around 6:30, but it was probably starting to get lighter. Um, Based on what we were able to uncover, what do you think happened to Heap?
Boy, if we had that crystal ball, wouldn't that be cool? But these kind of cases really boil down to information that the police are keeping close to the vest. And I suspect the family members have some insight and theories, which is kind of a frustration when we can't really share or talk with them to get some ideas. But I like to think of it in three buckets when I look at these kinds of cases. Number one is foul play. We have to consider the possibility of foul play. Number two, that this kid hits 21 and decides, I'm going to go start a new life for myself. And then, of course, along the lines with your thinking there, was there an accident? So let's talk about those for just a minute. And I want to theorize a little bit, starting with foul play. I mean, think about that, Taylor. What might some of the circumstances be that would suggest there was foul play? And I want you to think about Heap's lifestyle. Give me a couple of ideas that you think could have happened if this kid somehow fell prey or victim to foul play.
Based on what I've seen in the past few years, as far as sometimes people falling into maybe an internet scam or meeting someone online that you think that you know and trust, and then deciding to meet up with them and things go horribly wrong. I think that that could be a possibility. Again, it's so hard for me to not know exactly the way that those kinds of things were going in 2003. But it seems like it's definitely could be a possibility, especially where it was someone that maybe his family didn't know because they reached out to all of his possible friends and connections in his daily life, and no one seemed to know anything. But again, without knowing if they reached out to people he was talking to online, it's possible that someone could have lured him away. I think that sometimes we jump to the conclusion of maybe someone ran away, but there's also a possibility that someone did leave on their own, but because of the influence of someone else.
I want to focus on something you said earlier. So the idea that somebody may have lured him away from an online interaction. Now today people are a little more savvy, and yet we see it every day in the news where somebody is suckered by the scams from Central African continents or things like that. But back then, it was kind of a new thing, and people were trusting about everything that they were reading and seeing. Um, so, if someone were to lure him away, if they were going to be going to meet for something like to run away together, wouldn't you expect that he would pack some things, wouldn't leave necessarily at 6:30 in the morning when he's late for work, but maybe that night? I mean, we have to think a little bit about the reasonableness of the possibility.
Definitely. And I think that you're right. I think that unless it was something that was maybe a last minute thing, or maybe I just don't know what would cause him to skip a shift at work. Because he didn't call in. He didn't call in and say, hey, I'm not going to make it. He just didn't show up. And that seems like a pretty big thing to plan that last minute. Like we've talked about in these cases before. That's a really hard thing to pull off the day of. So I'm just trying to think of the different possibilities of something that could have happened with knowing that he's friends with people online.
Now there were articles online that suggested that the HR manager at his job remained connected with the family, tried to provide resources and support. It would be interesting to know what his first couple of weeks at that job site were like. Was he involved in any conflicts that might, again, point toward foul play? But usually, in cases like this, where again we see this behavior where he just gets up and leaves, he's leaving late, which means that it's already disorganized. When something happens in those kinds of situations, it's usually opportunistic in nature. It's not a well thought out, well planned kind of a thing. And when things are disorganized like that, there are usually many more mistakes. This kid simply disappears, and his vehicle disappears. That takes a lot of effort for a criminal to completely wipe someone off of the map. And you think about it, this is a 21-year-old kid that doesn't have anything. What on earth would be the motivation for that?
Absolutely, like you just mentioned, he didn't have credit cards. I don't think he even maybe had a bank account. I think he was just using cash at this time. So it is really hard to know. And he'd only been at that job for about 2 weeks when he disappeared. So it's hard to know what that work relationship looked like.
Yeah. So let's consider the possibility that I'm kind of putting that one on a shelf. I just don't have a lot of warm fuzzies about the possibility that he was a victim. Police looked into that. They said, "Nah, we don't think it was so." It is certainly an area that's filled with crime, but that requires him getting into a position where thugs are going to be around him or somebody that would take advantage of him. So let's think about the possibility that he just plain got tired of things. He's 21 years old, wants to sow his oats. He I mean, in that kind of a case, what kind of things would you expect that we would discover? And I want to talk about it logistically. Tell me what it would be like if you decided you were going to just pack up tomorrow morning at 6:30 in the morning and disappear to start a new life.
Oh my goodness. Every time that comes up as a possibility in these cases, I try to come up with a logical way that someone would be able to pull that off, and I have the hardest time getting there. So, first of all, we know that Heap was 21. He had been taking some college classes. It said that he had stopped going to school, and I'm not sure if that meant because he had graduated or if he had taken some time off of school, but he was working at a pizza place. So, he wasn't making a ton of money for sure. Then he started this new job. If he'd only been there for about 2 weeks, we can assume he'd maybe gotten one paycheck since then. The biggest factor for me is the money. Where would he have saved money away? He didn't have a bank account, so maybe he had some cash saved up. But even then, what amount of money would you have saved up after working at a pizza place and then just starting a new job? So that's the first big one for me. And then, like you mentioned, trying to leave without any of your stuff, that's another huge expense if you're just going to up and leave and start a new life with what things. I
Yeah, there you go.
also,
Was the car his or was it his parents' car?
yeah, was it paid
Um,
off?
yeah, did he pack a bag or did he just take his lunch like he does every day? And I love your comment about did he get his first paycheck yet? Because you got to somehow fund these little excursions when you go on them. I think you had some other thoughts there.
I think just the last thing that I always kind of think of in these situations where it's possible, not probable, but possible that someone just left to start a new life. There are other things logistically like driver's licenses, social security numbers. You can't go and get a new job without those kinds of documents and paperwork. So then it leads you into the whole idea that if he were to get somehow a fake ID or a new identity, that's where it gets very thriller movie for me, and that's when my brain just goes, this can't be it. That can't be what happened. It makes no sense. Do you think that's something that's possible, or do you think that it's probably a very unlikely scenario?
Well, I'm with you. I think that in order to do something like that, to go start a new life, there is a logistics challenge that has to be accomplished. It has to be conquered. He has to have finances. He has to have a set of clothes that he's taken with him. He has to have money in his pocket or a bank account to be able to lean on. And like you said, kids weren't that sophisticated back then to go out and just find ID that they could get away with. We were less likely, although this was a few years after 9/11, so things had really started to tighten up as it pertains to identification. But identification was still evolving from what you could have maybe created on your own. I think it's less likely, and it kind of drives me to go back to that initial discussion about the possibility of an accident. So I would then pose to you, it's 6:30 in the morning. This kid usually leaves between 5:30 and 6 for his job, which is a half-hour drive roughly. What kind of things would cause you to lean toward this idea of an accident?
So, for sure, the first thing that I thought of was maybe there had been an accident, like I mentioned before, with the weather. It was December. I thought, okay, it's winter. Maybe it was snowing. But like I said, there wasn't any bad weather that day. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't some other kind of accident. We have all driven in rush hour, and we know how tense that situation can get when things are busy,
But
especially when you're
6:30
running
in the
late.
morning isn't rush hour, right?
I guess not. I'm trying to think. I'm like, when I worked a job that I had to be there at 7 a.m., but I guess more people are probably commuting between like 7:30, 8 o'clock. So it would still be fairly early and before the roads were very, very busy. Since it was dark and he was already kind of in a hurry, I think that we have all experienced that. You're running out the door, you're supposed to be somewhere, and you're not there. And suddenly you start driving a little bit more erratically than you normally would, maybe speeding, maybe not being as safe as you usually are. Um, and that makes me think that maybe there was an accident. So I did see that there is a stretch of highway on his route that goes along the Des Plaines River. So it's possible that he could have veered off of the road. It was still dark. There weren't that many cars on the road. So it's possible that that could have happened without anybody noticing. So map it out for me, Mike. Does it look like there is anywhere along that road that he could have had an incident and ended up in the water without anyone noticing?
I like this thinking, and according to his family, he usually took this road, 16th Street, down to Harlem Avenue. He then would go south along that Stevenson Expressway to Lamont Road, and then on to 101st Street. That's really kind of interesting. And as we look at the map, there were a couple of places that I thought were really interesting. A couple of places where bridges go over rivers. And I went back and looked at some of the aerial imagery from 2003. And in some places, it's a little less fortified than it is today. So there are a couple of locations that are interesting. There, as you get over to the river where you're talking about, the road does come very close to the edge of the river. And without being on the ground there, it's difficult to know if there are barricades that would prevent a vehicle from going off. There were dirt pullouts along there. So clearly there are places where people have pulled off, something that would be indicative of a place where the vehicle could go. The depth of the river through that area would be really interesting because obviously we've got to hide this vehicle and it can be hidden in only less than 10 feet of water. These vehicles can disappear, especially in some of that water that is more chocolate brown than crystal clear, like lakes where rivers and streams we see in some of the pristine areas where we live. But the other thing that I found that was really interesting is there are a couple of places, one in particular that we can see here on the map, where if he were to exit the freeway a little premature, remember, this is only the second week he's worked there. He's a little bit in a hurry. He's not paying close attention, I would suspect. But this thing, again, is going to go back to the fact that usually between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, he's out the door. It's now 6:30. He's running late. He probably sprang from bed, may not have taken a shower, all those things that kind of clear the cobwebs out of your brain, and jumped in his car. And I'm like you. I think it's very possible and perhaps even probable that he was driving faster than the speed limit, trying to make up time, and may have overcorrected and ended up in a watery grave.
Possible. Like you said, when I was looking at this map, I didn't even think I need to start doing this from now on, going back in time, because we can do that on our maps and look at what it looked like in 2003. Because, like you said, the difference between then and now, there are new roads that are built, there might be more barriers. It's just something that's constantly changing and evolving. And I think that it's definitely possible that there might be somewhere that he could have veered off the road that at that time didn't have a barrier. And this is where our viewers come in and help to provide very important information. If you know something about this case, you can call the Berwyn Police Department immediately and share that information. Please don't broadcast it through social media. We love to hear your tips. We love to hear your theories, but make sure that if you have a tip, you go straight to law enforcement.
Well, there you go, folks. I mean, if there's anything that you know about this case, reach out to law enforcement immediately. Again, and make sure that you're entering your comments down below about this case. But you can't stop there. Read over the comments that your peers are submitting down below. Spend some time responding to each other. Help each other kind of work through some of these questions. Well, there you go, folks. Please enter your thoughts down below. And if you know anything about the mysterious disappearance of Heap Lou, please reach out to law enforcement immediately. Please hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. And I hope you'll consider sharing our channel with your friends. In addition, I hope you'll join our channel memberships. My favorite is the Academy level. And please make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil on your favorite podcast platform. Please visit our website at profilingevil.com and check out our books and all of our swag there, and sign up for our digital newsletter. It's called the B.O.L.O, and that stands for Be on the Lookout. We only send it out a couple of times a year, and I think you'll enjoy being on it. And we're never going to share your contact information with anybody. We're only asking for you to put your email address in there. So make sure you're checking us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And thanks for supporting Profiling Evil, everyone. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.